Life in Alexandra was exhilarating and precarious. Its atmosphere was alive, its spirit adventurous, its people resourceful. Although the township did boast some handsome buildings, it could fairly be described as a slum. Living testimony to the neglect of the authorities, the roads were unpaved and dirty, and filled with hungry, undernourished children scampering around half naked. The air was thick with the smoke from coal fires in tin braziers and stoves. A single water tap served several houses. Pools of stinking stagnant water full of maggots collected by the side of the road. Alexandra was known as Dark City for its complete absence of electricity. Walking home at night was perilous, for there were no lights. The silence pierced my yells, laughter, and occasional gunfire, so different from the darkness of the torrent sky, which seemed to envelop one in a welcome embrace. The township was desperately overcrowded. Every square foot was occupied by either a ramshackle house or a tin roof shack, as so often happens in desperately poor places. The worst elements came to the fore. Life was cheap, the gun and the knife ruled at night. Gangsters known as Tsotsis carrying flick knives or switchblades were plentiful and prominent. In those days, they emulated American movie stars and wore fedoras and double-breasted suits and white, colorful ties. Police raids were a regular feature of life in Alexandra. The police routinely arrested masses of people for past violations, possession of liquor, and failure to pay the poll tax. On almost every corner there were shivans, illegal saloons that were shacks where home-brewed beer was served. In spite of the hellish aspects of life in Alexandra, the township was also a kind of heaven, as one of the few areas of the country where Africans could acquire freehold property and run their own affairs, where people did not have to go to the tyranny of white municipal authorities. Alexandra was an urban promised land, evidenced that a section of our people had broken their ties with the rural areas and become permanent city dwellers. The government, in order to keep Africans in the countryside or working in the mines, maintained that Africans were by nature a rural people, ill-suited to city life. Alexandra, despite its problems and flaws, gave the lie to that argument. Its population, drawn from all African language groups, was well adapted to city life and politically conscious. Urban life tended to abrade tribal and ethnic distinctions, and instead of being Zuzas or Sotos or Zulus or Shagans, we were Alexandrians. This created a sense of solidarity, which caused great concern among the white authorities. The government had always utilized divide and rule tactics when dealing with Africans and depended on the strength of ethnic divisions between the people. But in places like Alexandra, these differences were being erased. Alexandra occupies a treasured place in my heart. It was the first place I ever lived away from home. Even though I was later to live in Orlando, a small section of Soweto, for a far longer period than I did in Alexandra, I always regarded Alexandra Township as a home where I had no specific house, and Orlando as a place where I had a house but no home. In that first year, I learned more about poverty than I did in all my childhood days in Kunu. I never seemed to have money, and I managed to survive on the meagerest of resources. The law firm paid me a salary of £2 per week, having generously waived the premium the articled clerks normally paid the firm. Out of that £2, I paid 13 cents 4 days a month for my room at the Zumas. The cheapest means of transport to and from Alexandra was the native bus for Africans only, which at £1 10 cents a month made a considerable dent in my income. I was also paying fees to the University of South Africa in order to complete my degree by correspondence. I spent another pound or so on food. Part of my salary was spent on an even more vital item, candles. For without them, I could not study. I could not afford a paraffin lamp. Candles allowed me to read late into the night. I was inevitably short of more than a few pence each month. On many days, I walked the 6 miles to town in the morning and the 6 back in the evening in order to save the bus fare. I often went days without more than a mouthful of food and without a change of clothing. Mr. Sidelsky, who was my height, once gave me an old suit of his and assisted by considerable stitching and patching. I wore that suit every day for almost 5 years. In the end, there were more patches than suit. Mr. Sidelsky, who was my height, once gave me an old suit of his. One afternoon, I was returning to Alexandra by bus and took a seat next to another fellow about my age. He was one of those young men who affected a style of dress that mimicked the well-tailored gangsters in American movies. I realized that my suit was just touching the hem of his jacket. He noticed it also and very carefully moved away so that my jacket would not sully his. It was a tiny gesture, comical in retrospect, but painful at the time. There is little to be said in favor of poverty, but it was often an incubator of true friendship. Many people will appear to befriend you when you are wealthy, but precious few will do the same when you are poor. If wealth is a magnet, poverty is a kind of repellent. Yet poverty often brings out the true generosity in others. One morning I decided to walk to town to save money and spotted a young lady who had been with me at Fort Hare. Her name was Phyllis Masiko, and she was walking towards me on the same side of the street. I was embarrassed by my threadbare clothing and crossed to the other side, hoping she would not recognize me. But I heard her call out, "Nelson, Nelson." I stopped and crossed over, pretending that I had not noticed her until that moment. She was pleased to see me, but I could tell that she observed how shabby I looked. "Nelson," she said, "here is my address, 234 Orlando East. Come and visit me." I resolved not to humiliate myself again, but one day I was in need of a proper meal and dropped in. She fed me without alluding to my poverty, and from then on I continued to visit her. My landlord, Mr. Zuma, was not wealthy, but he was a kind of philanthropist. Every Sunday for all the time I lived on his property, he and his wife gave me lunch, and those steaming plates of pork and vegetables were often my only hot meal of the week. No matter where I was or what I was doing, I would never fail to be at the Zumas on Sunday. For the rest of the week, I would sustain myself on bread, and sometimes the secretaries at the firm would bring me some food. I was very backward in those days, and the combination of poverty and provincialism made for some amusing incidents. One day, not long after I had moved in with the Zumas, I was on my way home from Johannesburg and very hungry. I had some money that I had saved and decided to splurge on some fresh meat, which I had not had in a long time. I did not see a proper butcher around, so I went into a delicatessen, a type of shop I had never encountered until I came to Johannesburg. Through the glass, I saw a large and appetizing piece of meat and asked the man behind the counter to carve off a piece. He wrapped it up and I put it under my arm and headed home, dreaming of the dinner that awaited me. When I returned to my room in Alexandra, I called to one of the young daughters in the main house. She was only 7, but a clever girl. I said to her, "Would you take this piece of meat to one of your older sisters and ask her to cook it for me?" I could see her trying to suppress a smile, but she was too respectful of her elders to laugh. With some irritation, I asked her whether something was wrong. Very softly she said, "This meat is cooked." I asked her what she was talking about. She explained that I had bought a piece of smoked ham and that it was meant to be eaten just as it was. This was entirely new to me, and rather than confess complete ignorance, I told her that I knew it was smoked ham, but that I wanted it warmed up. She knew I was bluffing, but ran off anyway. The meat was very tasty. In Alexandra, I rekindled a friendship with the lively, ever cheerful Ellen Nakabinde, whom I knew from Hilltown and who was then teaching at one of the township schools. In fact, Ellen and I fell in love. I had known her only slightly at Hilltown, and it was not until I saw her again in Alexandra that our relationship blossomed. What little spare time I had in those months, I spent with her. Courtship was difficult. We were always surrounded by people, and there were few places to go. The only place we could be alone was outside under the sun or the stars. So Ellen and I wandered together in the veld and hills surrounding the township. Mostly we would just walk, and when we both had the time, we might have a picnic. Ellen was a Swazi, and though traveling